All right, welcome everyone. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Joe Schniebs, who will be telling us about data privacy and signature management. So please give him some welcome.
Excellent. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here at the Matrix Developer Conference. It's an honor to stand before this community, one that's been at the forefront of preserving what is perhaps one of our most precious assets in the digital age, and that's our privacy. Today I want to share a story that illustrates why your work here and our work as a community is not just technical, but vital to preserving the freedom and security in our interconnected world. Let me introduce you to Ada. Ada is a young woman from Almaty, Kazakhstan. She was a university student studying engineering with dreams of building a career that could lift her and her family out of poverty. She'd grown up in a world much like the rest of us, where the internet was as natural as breathing to her. Her lifeline to friends and family and her education were all tethered to it. But on this particular morning, January of 2022, Ada woke up to find that the world she knew had completely vanished. The internet, her only connection to friends, family, and the outside world, had disappeared. See, during the height of the protests in Kazakhstan in 2022, the government responded with an unprecedented move. They chose to shut down the entire internet. Imagine it, millions of people disconnected in an instant. The links to the outside world were cut, businesses halted, families were isolated, and the voices of the protesters who had been organizing and sharing their message with the world were silenced. As the protests began, Ada was still asleep. The government decided to sever the connection to the internet. When she woke, she found herself in a world where her information, her voice, that used to be a weapon she could wield, was no longer available. Her friends disappeared, her education halted, and the future she envisioned dimmed. Now, surely this is a heartbreaking story, much so for Ada, watching her own dreams and her opportunities devastated through censorship. But the real-world effects of this event were much broader. In that week of violence alone, 227 people lost their lives. 6 of them were tortured to death by the country's own law enforcement. The shutdown also cut people off from vital services, leaving them unable to communicate or get information about the threats around them. Worse, even today, activists, NGOs, and journalists struggle to piece together what happened over the weeks and months that followed. The loss of connectivity and the continuing digital decay of this event has erased the data critical to seeking justice for these victims. Kazakhstan also had a very notable statistic in this, one that reflected the choice of placing the governmental control ahead of its economic health. See, by shutting off the internet for just that week, it impacted commerce on a national and global scale. Kazakhstan placed third in a list of countries that suffered the most economic damage from government-ordered internet shutdowns. A staggering $410 million was lost just for that week of internet censorship in January of 2022. And that same behavior deters future economic investment for fears of a destabilized commercial market. It's a slippery slope. In neighboring Turkmenistan, despite having a much more rudimentary internet censorship capability and an equally aggressive history of using it, including the lowest internet penetration rate in all of Central Asia, and one of the world's most expensive and slowest mobile internet systems, they only ranked 10th on that list. These stories aren't merely markers of censorship for these actors, though. They're lessons, and these lessons teach them to be more subtle, more insidious, and more secretive in their practices. Models like China's Great Firewall, North Korea's Coriolink, Russia's TSPU, or even Iran's NIN offer effective blueprints for government-controlled digital surveillance, censorship, and information operations. I'd like to pause this story for a moment and tell a bit of my own. I'm Joe Schniebs, the founder and CTO of Ridgeline International. For over 20 years, I've worked primarily with the U.S. intelligence community, particularly focused on technical operations, geolocation, and digital identity management. I started my career in the U.S. Air Force, mainly working with our foreign partners to build effective digital security and accountable intelligence collection systems. At Ridgeline, we help guide our government and private sector clients to navigate this very complex landscape of ubiquitous technical surveillance, UTS, a landscape where digital tools meant to connect and empower are increasingly being used to monitor and control. I'm also honored to be the founding donor for the Center for Peace Technology at George Mason University's Carter School, where we focus on using technology to reduce conflict and violence in at-risk regions. Our approach focuses mainly on aligning infrastructure, communications, and opportunity within these communities to evolve from a mere ambiguous element of peace to something more measurable, more sustainable, such as economic security. Most importantly, though, I'm a father to 2 young children who are already well immersed in the digital landscape. I'm sure you all have children, so you know how it is today. Over the years, though, I've seen firsthand how the digital domain has become the new battleground. The very tools that had held so much promise, that were supposed to connect and empower us, are now being turned around and used to monitor and control us. I've been fortunate to be able in my career to align my passions for technology, privacy, individual digital sovereignty to better our world, especially for our children. And Ada's story, it's not really unique though. It's a symbol of something much larger. Her plight represents a growing wave of government censorship worldwide. An insidious force fueled not just by authoritarian governments, but a much more subtle power, surveillance capitalism. When I speak of surveillance capitalism, I'm referring to the very complex systems and algorithms that monitor every click, every scroll, every purchase we make online to assemble a profile of us. And this is not just to sell us products, but increasingly to control and manipulate our thoughts and behaviors. Governments and corporations have access to data about us that we don't even know exists. And this has fueled the rise of a more governmental power to forensically reconstruct that data around our activities from our past, as well as shape and predict our future. In the intelligence communities, this has taken on the term ubiquitous technical surveillance. This is a reference to the unblinking digital eye that eagerly records all of your data. This has been fueled by a large shift in data storage cost inversions, mainly around 2010, where it is much more effective to store all of your data and figure out what to do with it later than it is to employ teams and manpower to determine what should be deleted. This gives rise to the thought, and we've all heard it, that data must be the new oil. But we don't believe that. Data, you see, isn't exhausted when we use it. It's not burned. It remains. And because it remains, it can be combined again. For that reason, we think of it like creating matter or mining matter. New elements that can be endlessly combined with more elements to make infinitely more compounds. And the scale of this mining these data elements, is 329 million terabytes filtering daily through the largest aggregators, the Googles, the Tescos, the Carrefours, the Amazons of this world. It's staggering. But equally staggering, and much more terrifying, are the ways in which this data is collected and used. Everything is stored unambiguously in ones and zeros, allowing perfect recollection at any time, and all of the technical structure to make astonishingly accurate predictions for the future. As a matter of fact, last week, a colleague and I were casually talking about our trip, and we got on the topic of German cars. So we were talking obviously about Porsche, and then I was corrected that it's actually Porsche. So later that week, in what we would assume would be an Orwellian twist, my phone must have been listening to every word because I noticed a major increase in ads for Porsches. But my phone didn't listen to every word I said. Instead, it tuned into the subliminal digital signals, the behaviors through the technical sensors that I chose to deploy in my life, comparing that to an expertly analyzed, high-fidelity data graph collected on a global stage, and instantaneously and almost automagically, I was the perfect target for these advertisements. And admittedly, I clicked on them. With UTS, time and space are just data points. They're not limitations. A few years ago, NSO Group's Pegasus software came to global attention, revealing how governments use this technology to target journalists, activists, and even world leaders. Imagine the power of knowing someone's exact location, every call they make, every message they send, without them ever even realizing it. Journalists like those in Mexico were targeted for their reporting. Traces of Pegasus were also found on reporter Jamal Khashoggi's wife's phone, as well as several of his colleagues before and after his tragic death. It has been used to surveil, manipulate, and create political opposition both in active elections and to target those investigating those exact claims. In fact, Forbidden Stories, a Paris-based nonprofit journalism organization, and Amnesty International had access to and published a leak of more than 50,000 phones that had been selected as targets by clients of NSO since 2016. And it's not just Pegasus. Apple succumbed to the pressure and disabled AirDrop in China just before the protests in 2022, effectively neutering one of the only tools that activists had to share information privately. This wasn't some rogue state actor hacking into systems. This was a corporate decision, one that traded an individual's freedom for market access. Then there's the case of Ksenia Kavana, a ballerina and Russian-American dual citizen living in Los Angeles. In February of 2024, the same day U.S. journalist Tucker Carlson interviewed Russian President Vladimir Putin, she was detained in a Moscow airport upon landing for a trip to see her parents and her 90-year-old grandmother. This is a trip she had taken dozens of times before. The charges? She donated just over $50, US dollars, to an American nonprofit providing aid to Ukrainian refugees. You may wonder how the authorities even found out. Digital breadcrumbs left behind on our payment processors, the messaging apps, and a very intricate web of surveillance is the answer. All of this data, all of this power is available at the click of a button. And it's being used not to protect us, but to control us. The Russians knew about that donation almost immediately, something that should give us all pause when we think about how much our data is being used and watched. And even here, in democratic societies, digital marketing and social media have become tools not just for selling products, but for shaping minds and suppressing votes. Cambridge Analytica, their efforts in the 2016 US elections, as well as Brexit in the UK, are just the tip of the iceberg. Further below that waterline, however, are nation-state actors like China and Russia and Iran, and they coordinate very intricate efforts to weaponize our media on social network platforms to influence elections in countries such as Niger, Moldova, India, the US, and Taiwan. Our content, our patterns, our profiles are all harvested and hyper-analyzed by the same technology we gladly invite into our lives: our smartphones, our watches, our connected refrigerators, and our cars. But that data is being weaponized by actors much more interested in their strategic endeavors, such as deciding markets in which we will participate, if at all, and policies that will govern our lives well into the future. This morning, in an event that seemed to only fuel my conspiracy theory that we're all living in a simulation, as I worked out in the gym, my phone played German band Nina's song from the 80s, 99 Luftballons, we all know it. And I thought it was fitting because it's a song about miscommunication. It's about misunderstanding, and ultimately, a cataclysmic war stemming from 99 harmless balloons. And here we are, nearly 40 years later, still struggling with those same issues. But this time, we're playing it out on a digital landscape. Our misunderstandings are amplified by algorithms. Our conflicts are exacerbated by the same digital architectures that govern our lives. Despite the message in the song, though, it's still a great cardio day song. So, back to Ada in Kazakhstan. Her life was unexpectedly upended by the tragic and unforeseen events, but the access methods to do so were explicitly planned and co-opted by her government and several commercial entities well before that tragic week. Much of the current state of the digital landscape, hungrily slurping up the world's data, can be traced back to the same forces driving these authoritarian regimes' need for control just as much as commercial companies' demand for profit. We, the consumer, the individual, are but a blip between these immense powers. David versus Goliath. Haven't we all felt like an Ada before? We talk about Web 3.0, we talk about distributed services, we talk about these things as if they're a beacon of hope, a new way forward. We were promised those things in 2010. We're still waiting. But we must also ask how much of that hope is impeded by profit? And at what cost are we sacrificing our freedom for this convenience? We think that we should take back our digital sovereignty. Our ideas, our thoughts, our very identities should not be for sale. They should not be used to control us, and yet, here we are, living in a world where profit is tied to how well you can be identified, to sell you one more thing, or to silence your opinion if it counters the curated narrative. The reality is, if you're connected, you're being watched. Your behavior is being modified, and often these things are happening without your knowledge. The vast machine that profits from your data can just as easily be used to censor or suppress you. The UTS landscape has fundamentally altered the way we live, not just in government terms, but also in everyday aspects. We've amassed an ocean of information that grows larger daily, and this isn't just numbers or text or content. It's specific behavioral, psychographic, and demographic elements about us and our societies. It tells stories about us that we don't even realize we're telling. And in spite of the connectivity that our modern digital world has availed us, it has also introduced sometimes subtle and often very severe consequences. In 2024, cybercrime and data compromise is projected to total $9.5 trillion US. That repels consumer confidence in the very systems designed to protect their data. More pervasive commercial and government collection and targeting through progressively more capable tools will further erode this same confidence. The result has led to this suppression of dissent and fosters a feeling of mistrust and paranoia in our own digital resources. These tools, however, will only get more insightful, more subtle, and more prevalent. The sponsors and users of these tools will continue to refine their spectrum of longer-term control mechanisms and find permanent limitations on internet access that can achieve similar objectives to shutting down an entire internet, but with less public criticism and lower reputational, financial, and economic consequences. And the most concerning part, you don't have to be a state actor to tap into this ocean. The barrier to entry has dropped so low that anyone, corporations, hackers, governments, even you, can access this wealth of information. Language packs on your phone, the apps you install in the series you install them in, and your location services. All of these create a digital signature, a signature uniquely yours that can be traced, tracked, analyzed, targeted, and sold. So, where does this leave us? It's not all doom and gloom. Where does this leave you, though, really, the developers, the creators, the architects of our digital future? Whether you work for a private company, a government agency, or you're just an individual contributor, you are shaping the very terrain we are walking on today. Your work does matter there. The technologies you create will either be tools of freedom or instruments of control. We need our collective brilliance and determination to restore and preserve our digital sovereignty through technologies that can't be tampered with, distributed architectures that cannot be co-opted, encryption that cannot be easily broken, and identity management systems protecting the most vulnerable of our populace. The tooling for a better digital society does exist today, and we've inherited a legacy to see this society thriving upon these rather than a slave to the digital infrastructure that we can create. So where is this all heading? If we do nothing, the future is one where our thoughts and behaviors and even our freedoms are controlled by the highest bidder or the most powerful state. But that's not inevitable. We do have a choice. On a policy level, we advocate strongly for a need to push for privacy laws, ones that place the burden of responsibility on corporations and governments to protect our data, such as the GDPR, and not to exploit it. On a technical level, we need to continue to build our systems, like Matrix, that are decentralized, transparent, and private by design. Our company, Ridgeline, recently entered a partnership with Element Matrix because our companies share these same values. We must continue to innovate, but we also must remember that innovation without accountability is extremely dangerous. In conclusion, I challenge each of you to think critically about the tools you're building. Your work can either empower individuals or aid those who seek to control us. And together, we must prioritize privacy and sovereignty in every line of code and every platform we develop. It's not just about the next app. It's about freedom, it's about dignity, and it's about protecting the very essence of who we are as individuals. So I want to thank you all for the work you're doing. My children thank you too, and the future is in our hands. I think we're open for questions.
Do we have any questions?
Awesome.
Maybe everyone is ready for the coffee break.
Yes.
There will be a coffee break from 4 to 4:15 or 1600, 16:15. And so let's thank our speaker again.
Thank you, guys.